Hello, my name is Tenen. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of kind of how we came to be here and where we are right now. And it's going to be, this is more kind of the big picture and non-technical overview, and then we can talk about kind of the more technical stuff in the panel later on today. So the Open Syllabus project started a few years ago at the Buurma Center. I was talking to Alison Head from the Project Information Literacy, and she came with a really interesting kind of data set of a couple of thousand syllabi and other educational materials from her partners. She works with about 200 universities, and she said, let's do something cool with it. Let's mine them. Let's see what we can learn from this data set. And we took a look at it, but we also immediately thought that that's too small of a sample, and that 2,000 could easily grow into a million, right? And we said, let's kind of grow the data set. If we're going to learn from this corpus, if we're going to learn from this archive, let's spend some time collecting. And I don't think, knew what we're getting into at that point. Now, as soon as we began poking around and asking questions and asking for advice, it turned out that many people have the same idea. And I know some people get nervous when other people have the same idea. I get excited personally because that means you're on the right track, and that means the time is right to do something. And also, we should have known then is that many of the people who have the same idea but who have not kind of followed up on it, it's because the problem ahead of us is difficult, right? And so we were kind of the, well, I'll just speak for myself. I was the dumb one to kind of actually take it on to the extent that we can take it on. We very quickly got on to Dan Cohen's attempt to collect a corpus. And they did collect a corpus, although it was a corpus of links, not of the actual text. And we were interested in text mining and data extraction, so we needed to kind of build on that project and actually get the corpus itself in full form. A year later or so, we kind of got more partners. The American Assembly, Joe, who also, it turns out that, again, you start the conversation and people say, we tried doing this, or we would like to do this again. We wrote up a proposal for Sloan. And in this proposal, we outlined kind of a plan, and I want to just quickly go over the plan and tell you kind of which parts we are done with and which parts are still remain to be done and where we need the most help. So the proposal was and I think the project has three major kind of steps, and I'm sorry, the board got busy, so we're kind of, this is the part we're looking at right here. So it's three major parts to this, and it's not like they're sequential, although it's not like they will end once they're done. You'll see what I mean. So the first part is collection. It's just delivering on the promise of a significant research corpus, significant research archive, and kind of getting critical mass, right? Critical mass that will allow us to get the interesting research and analytic insights, and critical mass enough to drive some of the policy and intellectual property ideas that we want to kind of the conversation starter kind of with the university, right? You have to be big enough to get people to the table. So that was the idea. So the first part is collection. Oh, I shouldn't fall off the chair. Collection of the syllabi. We now, I think our count today stands at something like 1.5 million documents, thanks to people like Linda, who have been helping us collect, scrape, just anything that's not nailed down, we're grabbing. Now, I think we are now at the point where we can say that we've delivered on the promise of being a significant corpus, of being the large research corpus of this kind. However, there are some serious challenges remain if we want this to be a living corpus, if we want to continue this process of collecting, if we want universities to contribute their documents and continue to kind of enrich their own ecosystem, we need to think hard about the future, about kind of collection not as something that you do once as a research project and then you're done, but collection as a process, kind of set in motion processes at our home institutions, at your home institutions, maybe at the level of professional organizations, maybe at the level of libraries. We don't know. That part we haven't solved, but we've solved it enough to get that critical mass, right? So that's collection. The second part, and that's kind of the meat of it, is ingestion of that corpus into a database, getting it to a point where we can work with it, getting it from an archive to a corpus, right? Getting from unstructured data to structured data, getting to text, which really enables us to start doing the fun stuff. The fun stuff is the topic modeling and the data extraction, but none of that can happen until the piping is built. And in that sense, I view myself as kind of like the janitor of this project. It's a lot of really boring work, like setting up servers, making sure stuff is backed up. All that stuff needs to be done, and needs to be done right in a way that allows a very distributed group of people that you see here, geographically distributed and intellectually distributed, to kind of work on the same corpus, right? So that is happening. We're trying to build a robust way of supporting ingestion, extraction, and analysis of data. And I'm happy to say that we now have an API. It was just released this week, and we'll give you keys to the API, which really allows teams to work independently from us. We don't have to kind of talk about server access, this kind of stuff all the time. And we pretty much have completed the ingestion. We have the full text, right? We can now begin to apply the tools of full text analysis to this corpus, right? So that's kind of an exciting time. Again, we kind of delivered partially. There's still a lot remains to be done on the analysis side, and I have a feeling that you will, in kind of this summer and next year, you will start doing a lot of interesting stuff with the analysis, the fun stuff. Like, we can start playing now. We can now start having fun. Finally, the third stage of the project, and that's we're kind of not there yet, but the third stage is we would like to see kind of applications. We'd like to see research projects and applications. You know, we were early use case for us was your junior faculty, and you were asked to teach a class on, you know, intro to economics or whatever, intro to microeconomics or Shakespeare 101 or whatever class you're teaching. If you're good, if you're smart, and what you do is you go and you look for other courses. You look what other senior scholars, what others have done before you, and you learn from that, right? And right now that happens in a very ad hoc way. If you're lucky, somebody good has posted their syllabus, but right now it's just completely an ad hoc process. We would like to see, for example, an app where you see like what's being taught on Shakespeare, what are the canonical texts on macroeconomics, right? What texts are being used, perhaps even down to the page numbers, right? What chapters are being assigned. So, but really the apps, we would like to enable, the infrastructure up here enables hopefully an ecosystem of applications that we cannot anticipate. And finally, we'd like to use that ecosystem, that archive and the applications, to drive the policy conversation, right? We would like the syllabus, and I think Kenny will talk about this, Kenneth Cruz will talk about this in length. The syllabus is a weird document in terms of intellectual property. It's not clear who it belongs to, right? Like, I wrote it, but yet I borrowed a lot from my colleagues. Maybe it belongs to the department, because department kind of owns the curriculum. The university would probably say it belongs to the university. The profession would say, no, MLA, right? It belongs to the MLA or whatever, the historian association, right? It's not clear at all. What we have found in our kind of, in our adventures with Syllabi is that conversation is just usually has not taken place. So there's somewhere at Columbia, there's a server. It's like little puddles of data. They're puddles, and there's some guy, some dude in the basement somewhere going, yes, I have thousands of syllabi in the server, but as soon as you try to do something with that syllabus, there's not a policy in place. There's not, right? As soon as you start checking with administration, they just don't know what to do with it, and the safest thing to do is to do nothing, right? And we want to get past that kind of impasse where the default is do nothing. Do nothing. Do not learn from your own history, right? That's not an acceptable answer for us, and we hope to, with the energy that you see in this room, to really start a conversation kind of beyond this room, right? With our administrators, with our chairs, with our professional organizations. So that's where we are, right? So we pretty much done with number one, but this will continue. Let's think about how we can continue collection. Number two, more or less, we're well on the way of delivering on that, and we are now moving down this line towards analysis, right? We're kind of in this map, we're kind of towards the end of the second stage, and we're really hoping to enter the third phase this summer and this year. So that's my piece. I will talk more at length about the technical kind of our solutions and perhaps our successes and failures on the technical side, and I will yield the floor to my colleagues.
Could you pass me the plug? Yeah, sorry.
And should we do questions at the end of the whole panel or at the end of each talk? What do you think?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, if you have any kind of immediate questions for me, feel free to. Yeah, well, they're setting up, yeah.
Could you very briefly talk about fields and structure that these texts, that these syllabi are being ingested into? Titles of courses.
Yeah, so that's very easy question because there are none right now. So the only thing we did not approach the problem, and this was somewhat controversial. We did not approach a problem with the schema. So we are not coming, we did not create a schema and then try to shove the text into a schema. The only thing we've done right now is we have the full text. We have a document. We're using Mongo, which is a document-centric database, and the document has fields, which are not really enforced. Now, we're hoping, and this is on the extraction analysis part, is that we're going to use some kind of machine learning, topic modeling techniques to try to then tag things with fields. So we can kind of take a guess that this particular syllabus is a chemistry syllabus because it has all these chemistry words. That's where we're going with the kind of, let's call it, enrichment of the data set, right? The metadata will be enriched. Right now, the metadata is absolutely, well, there is no metadata. There is the name of the file, the name of the document, and the full text. But full text enables you to do all kinds of cool stuff. Extracting university names, guessing at the fields, extracting citations. Those are the interesting problems. Those are the problems which are attracting people from computer science and people who do machine learning and this kind of stuff. That schema will be transparent, and that it will be queried. If you have the keys to the API, you can query the API, and it will tell you what fields we have right now, right? But right now, the fields are document name, full text. Yeah.
How much raw data do you have? Raw data.
We have. So we have, I would say, around 1.5 million documents.
Okay.
In various, it's a mess. It's an absolute. It's PDFs. They're Word documents. They're HTML pages. Some of them are duplicate, I suspect. Some of them are not syllabi, I suspect. So going forward, we're going to dedupe and clean up. So that's the extent of it, and we do need help with that because we face some growing pains working with such a large archive, and we're continuing to learn about kind of best ways of doing this.
And you were mentioning about MongoDB.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have extracted information from the syllabus, right?
Yes.
You extract some structured data into the database.
Yes.
Okay.
So the archive, the raw archive, is continually being that's the ingestion part. It's ingested as full text, and then once it's ingested, we are going to extract metadata.
Okay.
So that's the plan. We're going to talk much more about that there's like a more techie session this afternoon, and we'll talk about it. And tomorrow we'll really try to actually accelerate and jumpstart some of these things. And this is where your feedback is very important in terms of if you do have a particular research problem, so like you are interested in the geographic distribution of blah, blah, blah. So you need geographic data. Let's make sure that the geographic extraction happens earlier than, something else, right? So we're hoping to kind of approach it in this ad hoc way. And that slowly over time, somebody will do the geographic extraction. Now the database has that field available, right? Later on, somebody extracts the university names. Now we're going to have that field available, right? That's the plan.
I just had a question about standardization of the format of syllabi. Like that would be nice if all syllabi had sort of like this certain set of fields that
like a paper, like a research article.
And
yes.
Do you know of any sort of organization?
Yes. Yes, George over here is creating, has a tool that does kind of structured, it's a structured authoring tool for syllabi. He will talk about his project. Of course, if everybody authored their syllabus with this tool, our job would be much easier. We wouldn't have to do any of these things. Also, these kind of... Yeah, it's an easy proposition, right? The difficult part, and when you author tools, when you author syllabi like that, they're compliant with all kinds of state stuff that like we don't have to deal too much, but some universities face that in a much major way. So you can talk about compliance so two approaches to the problem. One is convincing people to use a tool, so it's human engineering. And the other one is this brute force computer engineering, where you're like, I'm not going to tell you how to author your syllabi. We don't have, and we have very massive dirty data, but we're going to use kind of some clever techniques and just brute force to like extract. Like, it would be very easy for you to tell us what university you're from, but since you're not doing that and it's difficult to convince you, we're just going to kind of yank it out of there. So we are very much in the second camp right now, right? But I think there are people here that are very interested in thinking about like structured data, like born digital, born structured, right? That would be great if you can, that requires like human stuff that is difficult, humans. So should we maybe, let's move on. I mean, we'll be talking all day, right? So. Do you want to go next?
Okay.
Yeah.
Keeps on tuning out. Anyway, so hi, my name is Ted Byfield. I am for about another month or so from the New School, and in particular from Parsons, the New School for Design, an awkwardly named creature. And I think probably the best way for me to approach this is to tell you kind of how I became enmeshed in this tangle of people who are interested in these things called syllabi. And it's interesting listening to Dennis talk because he's kind of dancing very quickly through a minefield of things like sort of, I like your phrase at the end, human stuff. Right. I mean, there's across academia, there's this minor thing that we have to cope with called human stuff. And in many ways, I mean, I myself am not a designer. I'm not trained as a designer. I'm not a practicing designer, but somehow, of course, I managed to teach it for the last 14 years or something like that. I think precisely because I'm very interested in that human stuff and try as much as possible to serve as a kind of an advocate, not for the values of great design, whatever that is. I don't really care, but more for this kind of an anthropologically oriented observation. And working in a way that in some ways I think is very closely related to the social sciences, but with one key difference, and that is that we understand it as our job precisely to intervene and change things, as opposed to sort of maintain this kind of bell jar-like relationship to the rest of the world, which is totally illusory. So anyway, so these things called syllabi, you're going to hear a lot of talk about them, and as Dennis noted, primarily with an emphasis on technical standards, they're kind of odd creatures in the sense that we're not even really sure what is one. And we're not really sure, and I think that those objects are becoming even less and less so. 20, 30, 40 years ago, when it was maybe 2 or 3 pages of TypeScript that were, mimeographed or whatever, put through some A/B Dick machine or something like that, we had a relatively clear understanding of them. But as they become, as you will see, new generations of scholars rising up who are using new technical systems and new kinds of technical approaches, sitting alongside. And in many ways, kind of in a complex relationships with older generations of faculty who are much more accustomed to working with older tools, older systems, older approaches, and older assumptions, that you end up with these things that are becoming kind of poster children for post-structuralism or something like that. We don't really know what they are. We don't really know who reads them. We don't really know who writes them. There's no stable meaning. And then at the heart of this subject, strangely enough, is this necessary contestation of meaning. And as Joe mentioned, this kind of an effort to propagate a field through this sort of process of kind of contestation and misunderstanding and all these things. So this is the kind of perspective that I bring to them, or one of them. Now, collecting them is kind of odd. because you would think that everyone would pay very close attention to them, but in fact it seems that really no one even wants to read them that much. Like students don't really want to read them that much. Faculty have really complicated relationships with them that it's somewhere between, I think, a kind of like a baby and a diaper or something, you know. They're very proud that they've brought this thing into the world, and then they're kind of reluctant to show it to people. And the accumulation of those reluctances from the faculty member through the kind of immediate program administration, through the department, through the school, through the college, and so on and so forth, at every level you start to accrue new forms of resistance that have, you know, and we've heard the terms come up that have to do with kind of compliance at every, you know, compliance and integration at every level. And there's no question that a project like the Open Syllabus Project will serve to promote a kind of production of open standards that I think will have an effect on faculty and schools' sort of ability to maintain this kind of autonomy of kind of practice and thinking and teaching that's very essential to what they want to do. But at the same time, and we're hoping to do that in a good way, and I think as much as possible strengthen, you know, you build this kind of corpus and ways of working at it, in ways that strengthen the role of faculty and strengthen the role of students. So, but at the same time, we still nevertheless are working with objects that people don't really want to read that much. And oddly, yep.
I was wondering if and I'm not trying to be facetious about this at all, is if there's agreement on the fact that the primary audience for a syllabus is the student.
Is there? Do a vote.
Let me ask you this way: if there were no more students, would there be any more syllabi?
It's funny that you should ask that question, because I was going to get to that. I think that one of the, I think no. I mean, and also I think the intervening is really fantastic. So thank you. I very much like this kind of, you know, this open style. You've probably heard the social life of documents, right? I mean, the answer to your question is I think that on the first day of a class, the primary audience for a syllabus is sort of the 18 or 25 or 75 or 200 or 7,000 or, you know, people who are sitting in front of you. That number seems to be growing quite quickly, like mushrooms. But later on, it begins to accumulate different audiences, and I think that this is one of the things that we need to think about as well. And it's very much, again, a kind of the sort of materialist approach that I think that we need to bring to understanding them. Later on, I'll do the reveal, which is that this kind of materialist emphasis, I think, is in direct opposition to my colleague, Mr. Tenen over here, who tends to be bringing things in, looking at things in a more kind of like informatic and schematic and structured way, right? So anyway, so it's, as you mentioned, Dennis, it's hard. I mean, it's the task of collecting them seems to have been problematic, considering the fact that in some cases these should be the traces of the incredible historical, like the genesis of people's like intellectual formation. And you're like, well, that's great. Can I see the syllabus? I don't know. You know, they have this kind of odd ephemeral status. And I want to suggest, I'm going to jump a few slides ahead. That they have that we have a super complicated relationship to these objects, and that sort of everyone does. That faculty see them as both a kind of a roadmap, but also a sort of a prison or something like that. The students see them as something that they need to comply with, but also something that they can kind of, that they can work with. That administrators see it as something that they need to kind of impose upon faculty in order to coordinate curricula, that administrators are looking at them in order to try to optimize and optimize the environments within that they're working in. There's many different needs that are being brought to bear on these documents, with the result that they're becoming stranger. Like they used to be 2 or 3 pages, and now they're running up. I mean, I've seen them into like 20 and 30 pages. Many pages of which are legal boilerplate. Right, and this kind of like barnacled accumulation of legal boilerplate very clearly suggests that they're beginning to serve another role, and not within the institution, but also that the sort of nature of the institution and these relations are changing. They're becoming much more sort of contractual and even potentially tortious or something like that. That speaks to different kinds of mechanisms in compliance and integration, and it's not surprising that as these systems are changing, that the OSP or these kinds of efforts would begin to converge in order to try to collect them, right? And as we collect them, and as we will, I mean, as this number grows, the value of these documents we're collecting will increase in an arbitrary and non-linear fashion. The particular value of each single document, meh, right? I mean, does Google really care about your web page? Not so much. Do they care about the relationship between your page and these corpuses expressed at sort of larger scales? Absolutely. So anyway, that's a bit of babble about this. I'll tell you how, I think I set out to tell you how I came into this, because it's a very different process. Joe I've known for quite some years, mainly actually through activist circles that I was working with. It sort of crossed paths with Joe when he was working at the SSRC. And I ended up teaching in a design school, which is I think is a good way to think of it as a kind of premature retirement home for freaks. They're really fascinating environments where people who have lots of kind of non-conventional trajectories end up and bring lots of sort of non-conventional sort of areas of expertise and practice. And this is the New School, which is a very strangely shaped university in the sense that it was assembled through a kind of sort of basically a series of sort of mergers and acquisitions rather than through any clear kind of organic expansion of capacity, with the result that it's kind of lopsided. I think it's about, in terms of warm bodies, it's something like 55% of the university is the design school, and in terms of revenues, I think it's more like 75 or 80% of it. It's really kind of shocking environment. Or I shouldn't say shocking, I should say, here, let me show you. You probably will remember these maps, right, from the last elections, where you see the United States as you think you see it, but then you gradually see these sort of cartogramic distortions of it that show how the sort of different administrative units can be weighed in very different ways. I think because I was coming from an activist environment, and because I arrived at the New School when Parsons was moving from a kind of more Wild West set of hiring practices toward a much more sort of harmonized and sort of synthetic relationship to the university, I ended up becoming pretty deeply involved in governance structures, sort of faculty governance structures there, with the point that, surprisingly, I ended up as one of the co-chairs of the faculty senate for the entire university. That went well. But as I was, this put me in a situation that is relatively unusual for faculty, and that is that it's like I came into fairly regular contact with an image of the university, not from a kind of like unique or kind of parochial perspective of a particular department or school or something like that, but really the sort of the broad overviews of what the university was and how it was unfolding and how it was working. And so when we talk, for example, about questions of alternative metrics, intellectual policy, the state-driven aspects of the university and how it engages, and how the sort of external legal structures shape the internal model of what the university is. I found myself becoming pretty upset with this, and I thought, okay, rather than academicizing the New School, what we really need to do is start thinking about how we can begin to redesign a university, to bring the values of design to rethinking some of these academic structures and assumptions that are not really reliable. The activist in me was very much looking at this as an advocate of students, because I've been watching over the last 10 to 15 years the increasing toll that the cost of education has been taking on my students, and as well taking on colleagues around the world. I mean, we really see very clearly the kind of the marginalization of faculty, the kind of precaritization of faculty, and these kinds of challenges. And from my perspective, the heart of the university, to answer your question early on, George, I think is, we say, who is the audience, right? One would think that the initial audience would be students. One would think that the secondary audience would be other faculty. And one would think that kind of farther down the line, administrative needs, like in administrators and accreditors and regulators and publishers and so on and so forth, all these other bodies would be tertiary and I guess quaternary audiences, but they're not anymore, right? And so in looking at the university and becoming involved in the sort of the forms of governance, in the governance of it, and trying to think, which areas can we work with and which areas can we not work with? There are endless collective action problems within a university that have to do with things like cost controls, that have to do with working with accreditation structures and so on and so forth. Things that are very, very hard to deal with. But there is one area that we actually can efficiently work with and change things. And I think that has to do with the kinds of information and resources that we generate that can be shared very trivially, right? And syllabi are pretty much it. In many ways, they provide, I think, probably the most accurate image, high-resolution image of what exactly is happening within universities today and what exactly this educational stuff is. And for that reason, since they're relatively lightweight documents, complicated, difficult, messy, dirty, non-standardized, absolutely. But those very aspects, these things that I think tend to militate against this kind of like a kind of schematic or informatic view of what exactly the university is. I think that this dirtiness is also a source of real sort of richness and understanding. I'm going to show you a couple images. Since I come from a design school, I thought I would just show you a few things to help you understand where I'm coming from. This is an image from a book called A Humument. I'm not sure if any of you know it. It's an art project started in 1970 by the British artist Tom Phillips. He got a novel called A Human Document for 3 pennies and then started painting over it and has issued volume after volume after volume after volume of this document. I think it just showed it in mass mocha. It took like thousands of pages of this thing. This is a different way of thinking about what a text is and what a text can be. And I want to remind you, I was talking to Dennis a few days ago and we discovered that we have someone in common, David Damrosch. Yeah, right. Who ran the department you graduated from and was one of my old mentors back when I was at Columbia. And he's the first guy who introduced me to this, and broadly speaking, I think this way of thinking about text, not in the sort of fantastic abstractions of deconstruction or something like that, although I did remark earlier that I think that these documents are the poster children for post-structuralism. But to remember as well that these documents are very sort of rich and strange trove that is intended to be prescriptive, but in many cases ends up being descriptive, and the deviations and sort of failures to comply at every level with these sort of rational integration systems are something that we really need to learn from. And in particular, the way that people encounter the academy now is primarily, like people who are looking at it, they're primarily coming at it through the lens of things like promotional brochures, basically. You should come to our university, you should come to our division, our college, our campus. All the way down, we see this sort of promotional literature. And the one relatively lightweight way, sort of alternative that we have to this kind of promotional literature is something that's much more sort of empirical and accurate, are syllabi. And that we can begin to learn to, I think that by exposing them, we can begin to really potentially change many of the sort of fundamental aspects of like how the university appears to the rest of the world and to itself. And with that, I will shut up. Thank you.
I think it's fascinating to think of mining those kinds of documents, right? That have so much more than text.
Sure, but that is a form of mining. It's a form of mining that predates a lot of the sort of technocratic versions of what this is. I don't mean to just, decry you as a technocrat. Any questions or comments?
I just wanted to have a comment about, this might be like a little coder-centric, but, in learning new languages and just sort of staying on top of the game, like, a learning resource that I use are blogs. They're syllabi, basically, of these expert, sort of experienced developers who compile these materials and say, if you're a beginner, start here. If you're intermediate, start here. If you're advanced, start here. And these are actually living documents. There's a comment section in the bottom where people point out bugs and point out sort of suggestions of what to add, and they actually update them, and you can get sort of this full documentation of, the blog as it was 2 years ago and the blog as it was now. That's just a thought that's interesting. one particular professor in one institution will go through many iterations, and I'm wondering if like that counts as a duplicate, or how we should think about that in the syllabus sort of university structure.
Yes.
And I would
yes. I mean, quickly, it's important to remember that that a syllabus is a narrative document, right? It doesn't refer to a single point in time, and so, for example, we can accumulate the frequency within which with which X or Y external resource is cited, but at the same time, there's questions of pairings and sequencing and balance that shape the qualitative environment within which these things are cited. So this is early on when I was saying we don't really know what a syllabus is anymore. I think it's kind of it's an approximation, and these kinds of questions about whether or not the kinds of documents that you're looking at, I mean, they seem very far away, and methodologically it'd be very difficult to figure out how do we include them, but
I think you brought up really kind of two things very interesting at the same time. One is just this sort of innovative idea of, wouldn't it be great if you had, we had this syllabi, and people could comment on them and say, oh, but I would have gone from here, we could go from there. But you also bring up another point about representativeness. And I think that's one of the things that we'll have to deal with, which is, as everybody here knows who teach, we have a tendency to use the same syllabi over and over and over because we found out something that works, and also because the discipline requires, your discipline chair or whoever it might be, requires that you follow certain procedures, that you only can use these books, et cetera, et cetera. So when it comes to searching that through that archive, if you're going to be looking at the frequency of something like that comes up, for example, with Houston Community College where I am, everybody has to put the same disability, all of those policy things. Well, if you're going to be searching and suddenly you look at the frequency of how often these phrases come up, it's really somehow there needs to be some sort of normalization to that, unless people can say this only, unless we can show somehow that 7%, this, I'm so bad at numbers, but somehow that we can show statistically where these numbers are coming from. So, it's really important to have the whole text, of course, and to keep that the way that it is. But on the other hand, I think what you brought up about being able to be like a blog and somehow, I like that idea. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think that you're bringing up an important you're saying also, another interesting thing you're saying is that code and the social and informational organization of practices of code are a good metaphor for syllabi, quite independent of the fact that we're creating a database of syllabi, right? So that the idea of versioning or forking, for example, syllabi transforms what is, for me in my day-to-day life, an annoying problem. I have like 4 syllabi for the rise of the novel, and all slightly different. And I think of that as a problem. I want one that's representative. But you're bringing out the fact that the way we treat code or data can give us a richer and more nuanced sense of the history of our own syllabi or of other people's syllabi.
I thought you were going to go in another place, because I think one thing that is happening is as authoring environments are changing. So I was at NYU before I came to Columbia. We became a Google Apps campus. Many faculty members moved their syllabi to Google Docs because they could make changes. Otherwise, when you make a change in your syllabus, they have to move everything down. They've got to email this to everybody. They've got to make sure everybody's got the right syllabus. And so people began to use Google Docs, and they also began to use Google Docs for assignments and asking students to put feedback and to put comments in the assignments. And they didn't get 15 emails and had to answer 15 questions about how do you do this. So I think that for some faculty, this is already moving to this live space where they are always being edited and updated and shared with people and are opening up more to students. And that makes the situation a little more complex, but it does get you like a little cleaner data, but it makes it a little more complicated because one syllabus may have 15 iterations in a semester, right?
I think another question that we started is that how do you detect near duplications? Like say you make some changes, like small changes on the syllabi, and then you have another document. How would you compare the new document with the previous one? Would that think that they're two different? They're bitwise different, but you need to figure out a way to the near duplicate. So, and you want to like present a typical one, where you want like, well, let's say you build a search engine of syllabus, and then you search a syllabus, and you want people to get maybe the most recent one. So, or maybe you will list like all the version of the syllabus you have with the same type of courses and same years of exams, and let people to choose. Like, if you want to see the most recent version, this is what we have, and if you want the previous versions, we have them, but whether they are more helpful or not, it depends on you.
I mean, I think what Ted was saying about kind of the syllabus being a post-structuralist kind of document is that, and I think in what you're saying is that these documents, and actually any text, is not is always a changing living thing, right? And they actually have these, they have branches, right? And that's why I put my documents, I put my syllabi in GitHub, because then you can actually see branches, right? As you see, like, think about what the branch is. It's a very organic kind of metaphor for what it's not a fixed, finished product. It's always a developing product. So how that works, how does that kind of jive with computer science, with structured data, right? I think that's something that's why it's important to make sure that people with the backgrounds in humanities and history who deal with text, that they kind of cross-pollinate and work together with CS folks to really come up with kind of new and exciting ways to conceive of data and document and text, right? So I think that would be my response, is really thinking of things like collection and authoring really as a process rather than an endpoint. Now, just a few like more interesting things that really interest me in this discussion. The one thing is the comment that you made was so you have on the one hand the syllabus is becoming less kind of defined, right? But at the same time, you have institutional pressure to actually standardize it. So there are these things, like we are at Columbia, we have to submit, it's called the COI, the Committee of Instruction. You have to submit the syllabus, and they return it to you, and they say things like, it does not have a plagiarism statement. It does not have a disability statement. So that's interesting, right? You have two competing pressures, and how that's going to play out, I don't know. But I do think that we should not discount those little pieces that seem to us kind of annoying bureaucratic talk, because for a historian of disability studies, it's very interesting to see what the language is and what the institutional history and how these things are implemented, right? The syllabus does not only capture what's being taught, but it captures like a snapshot of the institutional history, and that's part. And I know there's several people in this room who are interested in that, right? So taking them kind of more seriously, taking them as a corpus of kind of very complicated, mixed data, mixed form kind of thing, I think will be important going forward. And another very quick thing that's going to be, I suspect, in the background the entire time and in this project in general, is that this idea between making the work visible, metrics, right? We talk about metrics, which could be very great. There's a lot of stuff that we do from peer review to teaching that's completely hidden. We don't get rewarded, and making it visible makes it also count for more, we hope. But making it visible, open access, also is synonymous with surveillance, with control, right? We, working with Linda from Texas, we realized that Texas is one of the states that is incredibly good at open access. Why? Because they really want to make sure that the doors of the classroom are open and visible to the legislature, for whatever reasons. I'm not going to speculate why, but right, so it's very, we will talk, yeah, so that little hint of like the open access, like, yeah, you feel good access, let's hold hands, and like surveillance. Let's like, I want to know what you're doing in your classroom. And that's something that we are absolutely aware of. And let's continue that conversation throughout.
That was really about the students. I mean, the whole law in Texas began because one student took some class at, I don't know where it was, we'll say Rice, no, not Rice, we'll say wherever it was, and she was very disappointed with the class, and she took this all the way to the state legislature. And so those there said, okay. Yeah, she said, I paid for a class and it wasn't what I thought it was gonna be. You know, so everybody has the right to know what they're gonna be learning in their classroom. So the state legislature, then those in education who are the same people who say kids have to take 15 tests before they get out of school. But anyway, the same people said, you're absolutely right. Now everybody, if you want our money, then you're going to have to, everybody has to show their CV, and it can't be more than 3 clicks away from the homepage. And, well, yeah, but that's, believe me, that's not always the case. But, it's, unless they're private, unless they're medical. But that's how it started. It started with the student, you know. So in a way that the syllabus really, at the beginning, is for the student. I mean, at least that's what's in my mind. Is, you know, this is what you're going to learn. And or what I'm supposed to teach you.
Can I suggest, after your follow-up, we can come back to Tessa and Rachel and
I would just add too, as institutions have more pressure for outcome assessment, the syllabi is the logical document to grab. You know, so many different departments don't really know. You talked about communication in media studies and those areas in new media. They really don't even know what that area is because it's developing and changing so quickly. So then all of a sudden they're getting accredited, assessed, and they grab the syllabi and say, here's who we are, which you touched on, you know, gives a snapshot of what the institution looks like. But I mean, that's a huge piece that wasn't collected before or formalized in a lot of institutions.
All right, let's move on. Let's move on. Like I said, this is all, we're going to get a chance to talk much more. So let's, so who would you like, are you going next?
Tessa, do you need to project?
You know, I could or not. It doesn't really matter to me. There are things I could show, but I could do without.
Two spotlights to displays. Yeah, and then turn mirroring on or off. So we try to do a license. You see that
mirroring
softbox
options
drag
in the menu
mirror.
bar. Lovely.
Sorted.
There it is.
Thank you.
I have a quick comment, maybe, or wait.
That's good.
Technically.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really curious to me as someone that's trying to look at the structure of the syllabus is, and I think we have a good representation of academic people here, is the syllabus as a learning aid, you know, as a roadmap to the course. And I'm very curious about how instructors feel about their syllabus as a professional product, as a product of their academic experience. And one of the things, you know, I think you can sum up really quickly is, if you graded your syllabus, what would you give yourself? And if it's not an A, then why is that? You know, and that gets into some of the things we talk about with like EPA, MLA standards. You know, as apart from some of the institutional things, because I think that gets back kind of to the heart of, you know, the student, this document that can help them navigate through your pedagogy, navigate through the structure of your course. And so, just like throw that out.
Just really quickly, that is a very interesting question that I think we should definitely take up throughout the day, because just the very fact that we expect the syllabus, like our expectation has become that the syllabus is going to walk the students through our pedagogy, right? Through, or provide some kind of articulation of a slice of our cultural history, or whatever it is, of a practice, of a skill, is not a given, right? It's like that approach to syllabus composition and utility has developed over time. Right, and one of the things that I think is that we can really productively examine through having a lot of syllabi together, particularly if we can start incorporating some older documents that are not so easily mineable, right? To understand some things about why we teach the way we teach, and why it is that we're so attached to this idea of the comprehensive syllabus that leaves nothing out and is the reference for everything. I mean, not that I don't think we should do it that way. I'm just interested in where that, our sort of received ideas about what a syllabus is and does are so strong and relatively unexamined.
I'm showing some older documents to
Yes.
illustrate
There
your
you
point.
go. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Here is
Yeah.
T.S. Eliot. These are just pages.
Yeah.
This is like a 25-page syllabus. It's pre-printed. It's from the University of London Extension School, 1916, during the war. And it's T.S. Eliot's Modern English Literature syllabus. So I think that's where I was going to end, but in fact, not as a reveal, but as, well, I'll talk about them for 2 minutes.
I have a bunch of those too, so
Awesome.
we can
Let's
transition
talk
to
about
at the
that.
end.
Yeah, so I'm secretly here to misuse the OSP database as,
Mhm.
as a historical archive. That's my
Mhm.
secret agenda. So I'm just going to talk for, I think, 5 minutes, because a lot of the issues that I wanted to throw out onto the table have already been raised, and I think this conversation is great and should keep going. I'm here wearing 2 hats. I'm with the Swarthmore College Syllabus Project, along with Nabil Kashyap over there, our digital librarian. He's a librarian and he does digital stuff. He's not digital. And Andrew Ruther. That is your title, though, isn't it? What is your title? Yeah, digital librarian.
Just digital.
And Andrew Ruther, our academic technologist. So he's a database person, but also a content management systems person. And is a great person to meet and talk to. So I'm here wearing the hat of somebody who's leading a team to take a small corpus of 600 Swarthmore College syllabi and develop a metadata schema and tag them up by hand this summer. I'm having a group of students do this. So this is for the college. It's for research about the college. It might have administrative tool uses. For me, it's more about letting me denaturalize not the curriculum, but because I want to resist the idea, in fact, that syllabi are the DNA of teaching, but a set of teaching documents or a genre of teaching document from a specific historical moment, and use it to start to think about ways we might help students make new paths, find undiscovered pathways through the curriculum, especially in a time when we can't just open new programs, right? The kind of like big, heavy, institutional, formalized methods for showing students new paths through the curriculum seem to be more difficult to institute. I'm really interested in these more lightweight kind of formations. I'm an English major with a sociology and anthropology minor and a statistics minor, but what are the 14 other ways I might be able to frame my education over the next 4 years? And I'm interested in the way that small project for students, as well as for faculty and the administration of Swarthmore, might connect up to this bigger project, seeing bigger pathways through larger sets of documents in relationship to our small curriculum. So this is a small liberal arts college small data project that we're working on, but I think it has nice resonances, and we can talk metadata schema and all that.
And if I can interrupt, we are very excited. I know there are several people very excited about what you're doing, because that corpus could be used as a machine learning training set.
Exactly.
So that's going to be awesome.
That's another great thing. And the first kind of experiment I'll just say one more thing about this project. The first experiment we're doing, just that we've chosen to focus on, this is just a little snippet of our metadata schema, is that we're going to hand format all the citations, pull down their unique identifier numbers to all the various scholarly databases and union catalogs, and try to, as a kind of first project, make some maps, not just of how courses and departments look when you imagine them as collections of texts. Kind of that's one thing, denaturalizing the curriculum by imagining what texts are shared across courses and departments, but then taking a second level, pulling down library and article database subject headings and making a similar kind of heat map of where the intensities of those subject headings fall. Again, just like one lightweight experiment, but a way to denaturalize the curriculum, strip away departments and programs, and see what kinds of intensities and commonalities there are. First little project. We're interested at Swarthmore in these, what we call these descriptive higher ed data projects. This is just a little cluster graph that we made, my colleague Matt Zucker in the engineering program made of enrollments by department, thinking about actually how shared enrollments also might give us a curricular map. So essentially taking a course and making its only metadata be students, and then visualizing what students co-enroll with what courses. And you get
the student is a paper and the course name is a citation.
Exactly, yes. And you get some common discoveries, like if you tell our program to create 3 major clusters, you get something that looks a lot like our divisions, our sciences division, our social sciences division, and our humanities division. But you see things like music floating up there with the sciences, and that's not totally non-obvious, but it is a kind of interesting curricular discovery. So all I'm saying, my main point there is that we're interested not so much in moving towards standardization, assessment, any of these kinds of projects, but just in descriptive data, thinking about new paths to the curriculum. And for us, the syllabus project is that. So the other reason I'm here is that I'm a disciplinary historian, little self-advertisement for the Living Disciplinarity and New History of Literary Study that I'm currently working on. And so obviously, I wish we had this database 100 years back. I'm thinking about disciplinary historians 100 years forward and what I can help in a little way do for them. So that I work on kind of close readings of fairly large numbers. Oh, so the thing I should say about this disciplinary history project, there are a lot of disciplinary histories of English from the early 90s, and they tend to be about research and publication. So we are writing a disciplinary history of English that's going to come up to the present moment, and we are thinking about publication, but we're writing it using a new archive, which is the archive of teaching in the 20th century. And really no discipline, there's a little bit of this work starting to happen now, but really no disciplinary historian of English has done this work. And it turns out when you look at syllabi and course notes and class rosters, you get a totally different map of English, in fact, right? It's a map of English where English professors teach any old thing as often as they teach what we think of as canonical, formally valuable literature. It's a radical shift. So that's just kind of a plug for imagining this archive as a research tool projecting forward. And I think following up on something Tessa was saying too, I am interested if potentially this project could accommodate the archiving of full text open documents, historical syllabi from the past. Things like right now we're doing this in a kind of ad hoc way. We're trying to get permissions for syllabi. We're throwing them up on our blog. But it would be great if the kinds of scholars who are beginning to do this kind of what I think of as new disciplinary history work that's digitally enabled, but about the earlier 20th century, had a place to put those syllabi. I think there'll be more and more. So this is just for fun. T.S. Eliot's Modern English Literature. He's teaching Tennyson and Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. You would never expect. More familiar, what Joe was kind of, somebody over here, I think it was Joe, was referring to the mimeographed 3-page. This is Cleonth Brooks's classic little set of text, dates. I do think they also make an interesting case study. I mean, the very long T.S. Eliot syllabus, which is quite discursive, and as he says at the top, the syllabus is divided by subjects and not by lectures. Right away, you get a kind of denaturalization of some things that when we were making our metadata schema, I assumed were natural to all syllabi. So that's my other reason for being here. And I'm going to stop there, I think, so we can get back to that.
We should really talk.
Yeah.
You wanna smoke
Let's
with
see.
me?
Maybe I should. Yeah, I just broke it, so we're on
Yeah, it's been pretty
Let's see. Yes, I guess so. If it works anyway. No, wait.
Yeah,
There we go.
I broke it.
Yes.
There's an NEA.
Now to see what it looks like. That is not.
Yeah, so if you,
So let's see.
you know how to mirror it?
Yeah, I don't have it.
If you
Yeah.
go, the simplest way, if you go out, put your cursor at the top to bring up the menu,
Yes.
and then go to the
Spotlight.
Whoops.
spotlight,
Yeah.
and then find your displays, stuff like
Oh, right.
Under arrangement, I think you can mirror it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. There we go. And now it is very tiny. Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. There it is. Okay. So I'll try to be quick because like everybody else, I think a lot of us are interested in the same things here, right? We all know what this document is and what kinds of information we could potentially, I think we have similar senses of what kinds of information are available from a large set of syllabi. We have similar senses of what the syllabi is and made of, current best practices literature anyway. And of some of the, to varying levels, to some of the difficult technical problems of trying to collect, put together, as well as legal problems and social problems, of putting together a vast, and using a vast document database of syllabi connected to actual texts. So, having given lip service to all those issues, I will say no more about them. I'm taking an approach to this. I like to think about the syllabus, or I've come to like to think about the syllabus, primarily right now as a literary form. And that has been guiding my ability to denaturalize the document for myself and in my research. I'm also working with two graduate students from UNC. I'm at UNC by Chapel Hill, by the way. John Martin, a doctoral student in information science, and Mike Fox, and they're both back there. Mike, who started out here working with Dennis and others, and now is a doctoral student in the English department at UNC. And we've been working sort of, to borrow Moretti's term, right, distant reading. We're working on both close, very close, so literary, like poetry level close readings of the syllabus, and as well as distant analytical readings of what's contained, the information contained in the syllabi, as well as and the language contained in those syllabi. We are working very similarly to Rachel and her team on a small corpus of UNC syllabi right now. UNC is a large institution and an even larger system. So eventually it will probably be a much larger database that we have right now. But we have a couple of different working sets right now. One is a heavily unbalanced, in a disciplinary sense, archive of about 8,000. Is it 8,000, John?
No.
Something? How many is it? 10 million?
It's like 5, but there's so much duplication that it's
right.
More like 12.
Well, what we found is that certain departments at UNC Chapel Hill put all their syllabi online, and they're free and open. And these people are not in the humanities, right? The humanities people have such lockdown on their syllabi, and we're supposed to be the people who are interested in teaching and learning, right? We're teaching all the classes on pedagogy. We've got these advanced, rigors, these paces that we put our graduate students through to have to do with, like, this is how you teach, and this is what we're supposed to teach, and these are the ways people learn. And yet, when somebody says, can I have your syllabi and show it to some people, it's like, no, I wrote that. Someone's going to take that and put their name on it and get the job I was supposed to have. I mean, I think that's sort of where it goes, kind of in the fear scenario. But that's a whole other set of things. So we have this larger set, but that's very unbalanced because it's all in the sciences. And then I sort of hand-collected from a bunch of friends a couple hundred syllabi across the disciplines and hand-coded a bunch of metadata for these things. And we're working on, John in particular has been working on just writing scripts to pull out some data and to analyze as simple as word clouds. These things have been really telling in ways that I'll show you in a second. I mean, I started with this question. You've probably seen this before, right? This document this cartoon gets a lot of circulation on like social media and so forth at certain times of the year in academic circles. Because, it became very interesting to me, this question of, we're all obsessed with these documents, we spend so much time writing them. Then we get all hyper-protective about them, we talk to other people about them, we learn it through apprenticeship. Like, nobody started writing syllabi from scratch, nobody, right? And yet, we just sort of walk into the classroom and throw them out there and assume that no one's going to read them, and half of the time they don't, right? Or maybe more than that, right? The only time when the syllabus is really read is when a question of enforcement comes up. And then suddenly you're pulling it out and saying, it's right here, you can't do that, right? I get to do this now because you did that. So I'm kind of interested in this idea of the syllabus as an instrument, as an instigator of action, and of what that means about the way we teach and the way we've come to think about how we run our classrooms and our relationships with our students, right? And because syllabi do not always look the same way. We're reading, these are just, the many ways, some of the many ways I think we can look at these documents. But particularly if we have a historical database of different types of syllabi that extend back over time. I'll skip this, but there's some very interesting etymological issues with the term syllabus and the battle over like syllabuses versus syllabi, because is it a Greek root or a Latin root? Like it's neither, it's wrong. It's a misreading, it's a mistranslation of Cicero, of Cicero, and for a tag, like a label, so it's like a mistranslation into Latin from the Greek. And then we sort of anglicized it. So basically, like, you can use whichever, now according to me, go forth and use whichever plural you want. And if anyone yells at you about it, tell them to be quiet. All right, Henry Adams. So this is a syllabus from 1876. And he's got like 72 or 73 subjects. It's just a list of subjects. And this is what, at that period, it wasn't texts, it wasn't policies. It was just like, first we're going to do, Flanders and France. Second, we're going to do Belgium. Third, we're going to do, yes, right? So this goes on. This is from Harvard. Political history of Europe from the 10th to the 15th century. Oh my goodness. We also have things like this, right? This is a senior literature class, and it's handwritten, and it's very pretty. And, you've got these brackets that group texts. It's just really kind of remarkable. And then we start seeing, in the 50s, what looks more like what we what we come to it with, right? You start to see things broken down, required readings, what our exams are going to look like, what the course policies are, that kind of thing. So when John sat down and started just generating some really simple word clouds just of the language here, we expected to find all kinds of stuff out about disciplinarity and how different disciplines teach and learn, and trends, right? Educational trends, who's teaching what at what time, if discipline and punish was assigned in 72 courses in 1999, how many times was it assigned in 1985 versus that kind of thing. So to track text adoption, concept adoption, author usage, maybe identify cross-disciplinary collaborations, possibly over a university, right? If you could say who's teaching this text, and then you find out that somebody in a very different discipline is teaching that text, you might say, I could contact that person, or I might want to think about how I'd use this text differently if somebody in biology is also teaching it when I'm in English. So that kind of thing. So we go in, and we start trying to learn these wonderful things that we're going to learn, and we find that we get procedural language, right? It's you will. Students will. This course is, right? The whole time. It's like your role is, my role is. And that's about it, right? So then you run into the question of, do we discard all these commonly occurring words? As stop words, do we exclude them and then just say we only want to learn the really particular disciplinary things? Or do we say, okay, actually this is telling us something, about how we're conducting our business. And maybe that is an interesting thing to learn too. So we've been coming at it from all these different angles. This was another, I'll let John at some point tell you more about this one. It's pretty cool. But you can't really see it from here, and neither can I, so we'll do that later. At the moment, what we're working on is another thing that we're doing is creating, that's kind of mutated, but whatever, an interface, just a simple front end for what a tool for a UNC instructor or student might look like to explore the archive, with a search page where you could enter, say, author name, subject discipline, year, create visualizations. That's sort of our next add-on, is to be able to pull up interactive visualizations of search terms on the fly. And these are dummy results, but that is what the results will look like once we have the thing going. And here under team, we have the Open Syllabus Project and all the rest of us. And just as another example of what we're looking at, this is the front page of a syllabus recently handed out by the artist and author Rachel Berry. And, you know, you will not be graded on your technical drawing ability, but you will be graded on the effort and time. You know, it's this kind of thing. And so what kind of class environment is being created there? What kind of students are we creating? Their attitudes toward education? How much, you know, can we influence this? Probably through the way we write these things. Efficacy isn't necessarily, and enforcement is not necessarily, you know, the primary purpose of the syllabus, which it has come to be, I think. So.
Created by students
or by I think it is. It was a joint effort. You know.
Did you say that's Linda Berry's?
This is Linda Berry, yeah.
Yeah.
She goes on like this for like 15 pages.
Which, you know, I love that syllabus and it really speaks to me, but, you know, the thing that I see immediately is how inaccessible it is.
Well, it's easier to see if it's not up there, but yes.
Yeah,
but yes.
Someone that has a visual impairment, if they're blind or if they have low vision or you know, if they have abilities, you know, they don't have good spatial relationships or whatever.
Well, she does have a straight version as well. And it is an art class, right? So there's kind of, she's doing design, so there's that piece to it as well. But, you know, regardless of how we think about it as pedagogy, and I'm not saying this is what we should all be doing. If I did this, it would be a disaster. But that people are doing this kind of thing. And if we're going to study the way the syllabus is used and its effects on our practice as researchers and as instructors, and on our students' practice as learners, then we have to think about the fact that people are writing these things in all kinds of different ways, and should probably continue to do so, because it is sort of an evolving form. Yeah.
Well, that kind of makes me think, because when we're talking about building large corpuses or large collections of syllabi and seeing what insight we can gain, but the other issue is that while most syllabi can be converted to text and you can use standard, you know, well-established machine learning techniques or data mining, or whatever you will, things like this start to bring in harder problems, because if this is an image, now you're getting into computer vision, because they have to translate that somehow to extract the text from that, and now you're getting into really hard problems. So now we're getting heterogeneous data.
I mean, it's the same with something like this. I mean, you don't want to leave something like this out. This is a really, you know, incredible source of information.
I agree.
But we could never get a machine to read it unless we wrote like a whole program for like this person's handwriting alone. You know.
Or you start getting into the hard AI problems.
Yeah. Right.
But there's definitely insight.
Yeah. Not this year and not next year, but
someday,
years from
maybe.
Now,
Right.
The AI will be able to read it. And
yeah, but I want it now. See, magic.
Just make it work.
Yes, I want it now via magic.
My research agreed with yours. I used I don't know if any of you are, I used Mike Scott's wordsmith program, right? And so once, I don't remember how many, I had to change a lot to plain text and stuff like that, took some time. So maybe 200 syllabi, and compared community college with a four-year university and the language that was used. But the same thing, in the four-year university it was, you will, you know, and I may.
Yeah.
I might.
Yeah,
I
right.
could,
yeah.
right? Those kind of things.
Yep.
And also, but in the two-year university, they seem to really want to retain students, because you have that feeling of, you know, when they tell you, please hang on the line, your call is really important to us. It's that same idea. You know, if you have any questions, you know, I'm here for you. I didn't find that in the 4 years so much as I found in the 2 year ones. You know, that we're here for you, and you know, please come by and see us if you have any problems. And there's also the, you know, just things with pronoun differences and the way that was used, and you know, you will, I might, you know, that kind of thing, and but exactly the same kind of results that you found.
Can I just point out, obviously the Linda Berry syllabus is the real outlier in terms of the work that we're dealing with. But at the same time, to the extent that there's a kind of like that it's being brought in as an outlier, or some kind of exceptional problem or something like that, tends to privilege this organizational perspective from which students remain this kind of unchanging procession of people who are paying changing amounts of money for changing sort of prospects. I think this is when I said that what we need to do is start considering ways of, for example, kind of redesigning university or sort of academic environments as opposed to sort of academicizing design environments. One of the things that we need to understand and really keep in the foremost of our minds is the fact that, in theory, unless a syllabus is purely going to be an alienated exercise in discipline and compliance, it's basically supposed to be a persuasive document, right? I mean, it should ideally be a document that students and everyone looks at and they say, well, this is fantastic and interesting. I would not have encountered these ideas before. In many cases, and I think you probably have all seen this, we would do a lot better to have syllabi than books. Many of the books that you see going by really ought to just have been syllabi or even just book covers or something. And so, given the fact that, you know, we've all heard of the sort of shtick, the usual sort of problem about changing media habits of younger people and so on and so forth, the idea that these documents can remain simultaneously unchanging, more and more contractual, more and more driven toward this kind of organizational standards and compliance, I think is like I think we're walking off a cliff here. Because at a certain point in the non-distant future, you'll encounter students who will say, this is total crap and I can't stand any of it. And it doesn't speak at all to anything that I know, anything I care about, or any reason that I would be doing these kinds of things. So it's in this sense that I think that we obviously, you know, Dennis mentioned the sort of conflicting, the sort of very overt conflict between, on the one hand, the increasing standardization of the documents, and on the other hand, this, whatever was on the other hand, I can't remember what it was, I'm sorry. Here, let me look at my notes. Yes, the lack of definition of the documents. You know, we had questions earlier about, like, our blogs, you know, being kind of put to the service of these things. I mean, I think part of the challenge that we need to deal with here is to try to figure out how to make sense of this corpus in a way that is really, really compelling. And toward that end, I think this is a little bit what I was starting to suggest and didn't do very well. Yes, entity extraction. Yes, quantitative analyses. Yes, these things are vitally, vitally, vitally important. But at the same time, the output of all of this study and all these sort of communities of practice and communities of inquiry that will be piling on top of this corpus ultimately should be, I think, to open the academy up in ways that are really, really effective and really persuasive, and not open it up in a naive way like, ha, got them all, here they are, you know, one big BitTorrent of them. No, we've seen that, but we're also starting to see the extent to which that kind of approach toward these very naive approaches toward openness and freeness are becoming really problematic and really dangerous, right? And so thinking about how to mediate access, so that the forms of mediation, which basically are things like the API that Dennis were talking about, provide a new kind of balanced way of structuring inquiry, right? Sort of is a kind of a BOGO filter to make sure that the people who are looking at it are looking in really interesting ways. But at the same time, one of the key things that we need to do, I think, is to learn to look at how people are looking at this corpus as well, right? Learn as much as possible through analytics and through, you know, sort of automated analytics, I think, but also non-automated analytics, how people are looking at the corpus to try to figure out what it is that they're discovering, because that will become, in turn, a substantial part of the metadata that we're accumulating, and hopefully we'll be able to look at that metadata both in the positive data, but also for kind of like the aporias and sort of, you know, missing areas, to begin to recognize ways in which, for example, approaches more like Linda Berry's might actually make more sense, even outside of the sort of, you know, the sort of there be dragons world of art and design, from which I have returned. Apparently in one piece.
Just a small kind of comment on this conversation is that, so I really love that syllabus as well, and it's difficult to parse, obviously, for if it is in a database, because it's wonderful, because it's unique and beautiful. But I suspect that there are very few of those, and I suspect, and not I suspect, I know that most syllabi are difficult to parse, not because they're beautiful and unique, but because they're in like crappy PDFs and old versions of Microsoft Word. And that's kind of a sin. They're difficult not because they're wonderful in some way, but because we're using technologies that are kind of awful, and they're difficult to learn from, they're difficult to mine. So I think that for me the step before structured data, before kind of schema, is plain text. Right? Teaching people to use authoring tools in general, syllabi and poetry, doesn't matter. Just authoring things in plain text in a way that allows us to kind of do creative things with that text, to reconfigure, chop it up, refactor, remediate, whatever it is. But to do that, we actually need to take our tools, and I think all of us are arguing for taking the genre and this whole the syllabus is kind of a literary artifact more serious. Right? Jonah and
yeah, thanks. Maybe especially just building on what Ted was just talking about. It occurs to me we spend a lot of time pointing out all the things we don't know about syllabi, but it feels really important that we actually come up with a smaller collection of things that are paradigmatic or archetypical that we do understand well, with the intent of using that to calibrate the tools. In the sense, like, if you don't have a collection that you know well, you'll have no idea if the tools are actually telling you things that make sense or not. And that is really common, I think, in a lot of the natural language processing projects where they have a corpus like the Brown corpus or the Wall Street Journal one. So and I think, Nicole, I think the stuff you're doing at UNC is like that, where you can get to know something really well. But I don't even know if in this room we could agree on what like a typical syllabus for a particular discipline and a particular era looked like. But I think we're throwing the term corpus around in a couple of different senses, and having that in mind should be an important maybe objective too.
I know you kind of just threw it out there, but I'm curious about this term. She has that version, then she has a straight version too, and I'm so I'm curious about what is the obligation of an instructor to provide the straight version, and I think when we talk about the straight version, what it's getting into my mind, and I think it's kind of the nexus of a lot of these different things, is recognizing diversities. So if I don't have vision, then how is that accessible to me? Or if I'm a second language learner, if English isn't my primary language and it's filled with all kinds of academic language that's very inaccessible, could be appropriate at a high level class, might be really inappropriate at a lower level class. But as an instructional designer, what excites me is I think that accessibility and usability are two sides of the same coin. And I think that just as these guys want to have things well structured so that they can use the data and parse it and understand it, I also think that it can help instructors put it into a format that's going to be more accessible to a diverse audience. In terms of, I can't see the difference between colors, right? So, or I have low vision, or we haven't even gotten to this. It's going to get deeper and deeper because a lot of these, they're at odds with each other. Cognitive disabilities. How do you sort that out in a higher education environment? So.
Yeah, well, I think all this, they're obviously like crucial questions, but not really questions that I think are invoked no matter what you're doing in the classroom. I've some semesters I go into a classroom and it's full of, and I teach a class with a lot of media. When we watch movies, we look at websites, we do a lot of media-based activity in the class. And sometimes I'll go in and everybody will be able to hear and see perfectly wonderfully, and it will be fine, and we'll just all do our things together. And sometimes I'll have two blind kids, sometimes I'll have 3 ESL students, and and I feel like it's part of my job to recognize who's in front of me in the class. I mean, to have a baseline approach to diversity and accommodation, and then on top of that, to recognize who is there and adjust my methods to address the needs of the individual students and individual types of learners as well as, yeah.
And as an instructional designer, that's exactly the approach that we take, because obviously it would be impossible for us to make everything completely accessible to everybody all the time. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's what's curious to me is, what is that baseline?
Yeah.
And one of the things I think that again, the nexus of this technical and with the structure is, I think when you're talking about text and you're talking about, HTML, that's accessible to a lot of people, because blind people have learned to consume HTML so that they can take a part of the internet.
So let me suggest we're at the end of our time slot. Maybe one more question and a quick answer.
So I was going to say, if you make an assumption that a syllabus is potentially the kind of document that may be viewed before you actually reach the classroom, I think it is 100% an obligation that you make it so that it is accessible to all, because you don't necessarily understand who's going to look at it. In your case, like when you say, I modified a class to meet the needs of the students, it seems to me that the syllabus, since it may be a precursor to that, has to already meet that standard.
Yeah, and that's the whole question.
Can I jump in here? I mean, one of the things that we're talking about is the fact that the extent to which the syllabus is moving from being primarily a kind of an expression of a faculty member toward a part of a kind of broader sort of integrated system. So in that sense, there's large parts of it that are not written by the faculty member, or the legal boilerplate that we've been talking about. In the time that I worked as a kind of program administrator, one of the hilarious things I saw, and I know is quite common elsewhere, is the extent to which faculty members absolutely insist on diddling with boilerplate language, right? So ADA compliance text, and it's like they just have to get in there and then start sort of messing around and changing this and that and so on and so forth, which for me is really fascinating on many different levels. And I actually think there's a lot to be learned from the parts of ADA compliance issues that people are having a hard time with, that they don't accept or don't. Okay, but the point here is that I think that this is vitally important, and I'm going to pound my fist about this today and tomorrow, and you'll need to come tomorrow as well, absolutely, is I think we can also look at faculty members as kind of others. We can look at everyone as others in this kind of discourse, and you can literally talk about this kind of autonomic institutional discourse from which, and from against which that faculty members, their reluctance to accept this boilerplate language could itself be construed as a kind of cognitive disability, because what we're doing is assuming a kind of normative context. The point is that they need to be open, they need to be persuasive, they need to be communicative, and I very much agree. I think your point is a really good one and a good one to end on. That if we're assuming that people will be seeing them before they walk into the classroom, that for that reason they need to be as kind of compelling and true and open as possible.
And not handwritten.
Well, okay.
Or less.
This is later on when we start at some point we'll start talking, I assume we'll start talking about syllabi that are driven by, large scale, integrated, commercial, curricular systems and these kinds of things. We're talking about them as other very discretionary objects. And for large parts of higher ed, they're not at all. So, but you're the boss.